Well, hello there. Before we dive into this story, I want to know where you're joining me from today. Are you watching from your cozy living room? Maybe you're on a lunch break at work? Or perhaps you're like me right now, sitting in a place where you definitely don't belong, according to some people. Drop a comment and let me know where you are because what I'm about to tell you, well, it happened to me just last week, and I'm still processing it all. That's quite a brave outfit choice for somewhere like this. Those words are still ringing in my ears. The woman who said them, Patricia, though I didn't know her name yet, let her eyes scan me from head to toe like I was a receipt she was checking for errors. I just smiled. I let her think she'd made her point, whatever that point was supposed to be. You know what's funny about being underestimated? People always assume they're the ones in control. They think they're holding all the cards, setting the rules, deciding who belongs and who doesn't. But here's what they don't realize, and what took me 60 years to truly understand. The person who stays calm while others reveal their character? That person is never the one without power. Let me explain how we got here, because this story is about so much more than a dinner gone wrong. I'm Laura Bennett. I'm 60 years old, though people tell me I look younger. Not that it matters for this story, but I suppose context helps. I'm a former business owner, current part-time language tutor, and full-time mother, though my son would probably laugh at that description since he's 32 and lives 3 states away. I thought I was meeting my son's future in-laws for a nice dinner. You know, one of those pleasant get-to-know-you evenings where everyone's on their best behavior, sharing stories and finding common ground. Turns out I was walking into a live episode of How Rude Can You Be? Except nobody told me I was the contestant they decided to vote off the island. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. 3 years ago, my husband David passed away. Lung cancer. 67 years old. Never smoked a day in his life. Ran marathons. Ate his vegetables. Did everything right. But cancer doesn't read the rule book, does it? It just takes what it wants. David left me his insurance company, Bennett and Associates. He'd built it from nothing over 30 years, one client at a time, one relationship at a time. It was his life's work, his legacy, his way of helping people when they needed it most. After he died, I ran it for 2 years. Tried to honor what he built, tried to fill shoes that were 3 sizes too big for me. But grief makes you tired. Soul deep, bone-weary tired. Every morning felt like swimming through concrete. Every decision felt like I was guessing at what David would have done, and getting it wrong. The company was successful, more successful than ever, actually, but I was dying inside that building. Surrounded by his pictures, his desk, his coffee mug that I couldn't bring myself to wash or put away. So I sold it. Got a good price, a very good price if we're being honest. The kind of price that means you never have to worry about money again, not that anyone needs to know that. After the sale, I moved to a small town about an hour outside the city. Nothing fancy, just a little house with a garden and enough quiet to let me breathe again. I started teaching languages online, Spanish and French, just for fun, just to have something to do with my days that didn't involve thinking about death and loss and all the ways life can sucker punch you when you're not looking. Hey, if you're still with me and you understand what it's like to rebuild your life after losing everything that mattered, hit that subscribe button. Because this story is about to get a whole lot more complicated, and trust me, you're going to want to see how it ends. 2 months ago, my son Ethan called. You could hear the excitement in his voice before he even said hello. Mom, I have news. Big news. Ethan is, well, he's the best thing David and I ever did together. 32, works in tech, has that earnest way about him that makes you believe people are basically good. He's always been independent, maybe too independent. Moved out at 18, worked his way through college, never asked for help even when I could see he was struggling. Sometimes I wonder if that independence came from watching his father work all those long hours, building something from nothing. Sometimes I wonder if I failed him somehow, if I should have been more present instead of always supporting David's dreams. The guilt of motherhood never really leaves you, does it? It just shifts shape. I'm in love, Mom. Really, truly, head over heels in love. Her name was Chloe, he told me. They'd been dating for 8 months. She was perfect, he said. Beautiful, smart, funny. They were talking about marriage. I was happy for him. Of course I was happy for him. He'd been alone for too long, throwing himself into work the same way his father had. If he'd found someone who made him smile the way he was smiling through the phone, then I was thrilled. But then came the dinner invitation. Her parents want to meet you, Mom. They're taking us all out to dinner next week. Somewhere nice, they said. They want to get to know the family. The family. As if family is something you can size up over appetizers and wine. I should have known right then. Should have heard the careful way he said somewhere nice, like he was already worried about something. Should have caught the slight tension in his voice when he mentioned her parents. But I didn't. I was just a mother, happy that her son was happy, ready to love whoever he loved. God, I was naive. Let me tell you about these people because understanding them is crucial to understanding what happened next. Ethan, my son, he's good-hearted in a way that's both beautiful and dangerous. He believes people when they show him their best face. He's worked for everything he has, but he doesn't understand wealth the way people who grew up with it do. He doesn't know the games they play, the codes they speak, the way they can smile while they're cutting you down. After David died, I never told Ethan exactly how much the company sold for. I told him I was comfortable, that he didn't need to worry about me, but I never spelled out the numbers. Maybe I should have. Maybe if he'd known, he would have warned me what I was walking into. Or maybe he would have tried to protect me, and that's exactly what I didn't want. Chloe, the fiancée, picture perfect in that Instagram way that makes you feel simultaneously impressed and tired. 28 years old, blonde highlights that cost more than most people spend on rent, and a phone that might as well be surgically attached to her hand. She calls herself a lifestyle influencer, which apparently means she gets paid to post pictures of her coffee and her workout clothes. I tried to like her. I really did. When Ethan first introduced us over video chat, I smiled and asked about her interests, her work, her family. But there was something empty about her responses. Like she was reading from a script someone else had written. Everything was amazing or perfect or literally the best. Nothing had depth. Nothing had substance. But Ethan loved her, and that was supposed to be enough for me. Then there were her parents, Patricia and Greg. Patricia, mid-50s, the kind of woman who's had work done but pretends it's all natural. Everything about her screamed money. Not new money. Not flashy money, but old, quiet. We've always had this money. The kind that comes with rules and hierarchies and judgments about who belongs where. Greg was her matching set, silver-haired, expensive suit, handshake that lasted exactly 3 seconds and felt like a business transaction. He had that particular confidence that comes from never having been told no about anything that mattered to him. During our one phone conversation before the dinner, Patricia made a point of mentioning that they were well-connected in the city. Greg casually dropped the names of restaurants they owned, charity boards they sat on, politicians they supported. It wasn't bragging, exactly. It was positioning. It was establishing the hierarchy before we even met. And where did that leave me? The small-town language tutor whose son worked in tech. The widow living quietly in a house they'd probably consider quaint if they were being generous, pathetic if they weren't. They thought they had me figured out before I ever walked through that restaurant door. La Bernardine. That's where they chose to meet. Not just expensive. Anyone can find an expensive restaurant. No, this was the kind of place that whispers its sophistication instead of shouting it. Marble floors that reflected soft lighting, tables spaced far enough apart that conversations stayed private, servers who moved like dancers and spoke in hushed, reverent tones. The kind of place where your outfit gets evaluated at the door, where the hostess's smile can make or break your evening before you've even sat down. I wore a simple black dress, pearl earrings that had been my mother's, low heels because I learned long ago that comfort matters more than fashion when you're going to be somewhere for 2 hours. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed money, but nothing that should have embarrassed anyone either. Apparently, I was wrong about that. Before I continue, I want to take a moment to connect with everyone watching. If you've ever walked into a room and felt like you were being judged before you even opened your mouth, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe, because what's about to happen? Well, let's just say these people had no idea who they were dealing with. I arrived 5 minutes early because David always taught me that punctuality shows respect. The hostess, a young woman with the kind of perfectly smooth forehead that costs a fortune to maintain, looked at me with barely concealed confusion. Bennett party? I said pleasantly. She checked her list twice, then looked at me again. I have a reservation for Bennett, but… She paused, clearly trying to figure out how to phrase whatever concerns she had. The party requested our private dining room. That sounds lovely, I replied, maintaining my smile. She led me through the restaurant, but I could feel her uncertainty. Was I the right Bennett? Did I belong in the private dining room? Was there some mistake? When we arrived, the others were already seated. Ethan jumped up immediately, relief flooding his face.
Mom.
You made it. He hugged me tight, and I could feel the tension in his shoulders. My son was nervous. That should have been my first real warning. Chloe looked up from her phone long enough to offer a picture-perfect smile. Mrs. Bennett, you look nice.
Nice.
The word women use when they can't think of a compliment, but know they're supposed to say something. Patricia and Greg rose to greet me, and that's when Patricia delivered her opening line. That's quite a brave outfit choice for somewhere like this.
Brave.
As if wearing a simple black dress to dinner required courage. As if I was some country mouse who'd wandered into the big city without understanding the dress code. I smiled. I thanked them for choosing such a beautiful restaurant. I complimented the ambience, asked how they discovered the place, made all the polite small talk that civilized people make when they're getting to know each other. But inside, I was cataloging every slight, every lifted eyebrow, every carefully worded insult wrapped in concern. I hope you'll find something on the menu, Patricia continued, handing me the wine list. Some of the selections can be quite adventurous for people who aren't used to fine dining. Greg nodded sagely. The chef here is very innovative. Molecular gastronomy, deconstructed classics, that sort of thing. Not everyone's cup of tea. They were explaining fine dining to me. These people thought I needed guidance to navigate a menu because I lived in a small town and taught languages online. Ethan jumped in quickly. Mom's actually a great cook. She makes this incredible dash. Oh, we'd love to hear about your home cooking, Chloe interrupted, but her tone suggested she'd rather hear about a root canal. Do you do a lot of comfort food? Comfort food. Code for peasant food in their vocabulary. As the evening progressed, the insults became more creative, more systematic. They had clearly decided I was an obstacle to be managed, a problem to be solved, a person to be handled with the kind of polite dismissal they'd probably perfected over years of charity luncheons and country club gatherings. Patricia asked about my little tutoring business, with a tone someone might use to ask about a child's lemonade stand. How sweet that you found a hobby to keep yourself busy. A hobby? Teaching languages was a hobby. Greg wanted to know about the quaint little town where I lived. I imagine it's very simple there. Peaceful. Good for people who want to slow down, avoid the complexities of city life. Simple. As if choosing to live somewhere peaceful was evidence of intellectual limitation. Chloe, scrolling through her phone between courses, looked up long enough to suggest that maybe I could start a lifestyle blog about simple living and finding contentment with less. People love that kind of content, she explained, as if she was offering me career advice. The whole minimalist thing is really trending right now. They were rewriting my story in real time, casting me as the simple small-town woman who needed their guidance to navigate the complex world they inhabited. They were positioning themselves as my betters, my teachers, my charitable benefactors who would graciously include me in their sophisticated circle. And through it all, I smiled. I nodded, asked polite questions about their lives, their work, their interests. I played the role they'd assigned me because I wanted to see how far they'd take it. I wanted to see exactly who these people were when they thought they held all the power. Halfway through the main course, Greg began what I can only describe as a performance. He started talking about his business connections, his influence in certain circles, his ability to open doors for the right people. You know, Laura, he said, leaning back in his chair like a king holding court, I've been thinking about your son's career. Tech is a good field, but it's all about who you know. All about access. He paused for effect, swirling his wine. I sit on the board of 3 major corporations. I golf with CEOs. I have relationships that most people spend decades trying to build. Patricia nodded approvingly. Greg has always been wonderful about helping people advance. He's like a mentor to so many young professionals. I could make some calls, Greg continued, his tone suggesting he was bestowing a great favor. Get Ethan in front of the right people. Of course, it would depend on compatibility.
Fit.
Whether he understands how to operate in certain environments. Certain environments. They were talking about my son like he was a product they might consider investing in if he met their standards. If he proved worthy of their connections. And the implication was clear. His worthiness would be judged, at least in part, by them. By his association with them. By his willingness to distance himself from anything or anyone that might embarrass them. Chloe looked up from her phone, suddenly animated. Daddy's helped so many people. He got my college roommate's boyfriend an interview at Goldman Sachs. He introduced my yoga instructor to this amazing venture capitalist. He's like a fairy godfather for careers. Ethan looked uncomfortable but interested. My independent, self-made son was actually considering whether he needed their help to advance his career. These people were good at what they did. They made their manipulation feel like generosity. That's very kind of you to offer, I said quietly. But I'm sure Ethan is doing fine on his own. Greg chuckled. Oh, I'm sure he is. But fine and exceptional are two very different things, aren't they? Sometimes we need to think bigger than our current circumstances. Our current circumstances. My circumstances. The circumstances of a small-town language tutor whose limited understanding of the world was holding her son back. That's when I realized what was really happening. This wasn't just about getting to know me. This was about establishing control. They were positioning themselves as the gatekeepers to my son's future, the necessary bridge between his current life and the life they thought he should want. And they were positioning me as the dead weight he'd need to cut loose if he wanted to rise to their level. The evening continued with more of the same. More explanations of things I supposedly didn't understand. More helpful suggestions for how I might improve my simple life. More carefully delivered insults wrapped in concern and generosity. Patricia suggested I might want to update my look before the wedding. I know a wonderful stylist who works with people who need guidance with fashion. Greg offered to introduce me to his accountant. Money management can be tricky for people who aren't used to handling investments. Chloe thought I might enjoy meeting her spiritual advisor. She's amazing at helping people find peace with their limitations. Their limitations. As if contentment was something I'd settled for because I couldn't achieve anything better. Through it all, Ethan looked increasingly uncomfortable but said nothing. My son, who I'd raised to stand up for what was right, who'd never hesitated to defend the underdog, sat silent while these people systematically dismantled his mother's dignity. And I let them. I let them because I wanted to see how deep their cruelty went. I wanted to understand exactly what kind of family my son was considering joining. I wanted to witness their character when they thought there would be no consequences for revealing it. But mostly I let them because I knew something they didn't know. I knew that the universe has a funny way of humbling people who mistake cruelty for sophistication. I knew that karma doesn't always wait for the next lifetime to settle accounts. And I knew that the head chef of La Bernardine was about to walk over to our table. Chef Marcel Dubois approached our table with the kind of confident stride that comes from owning your domain. He's a legend in the culinary world, French, precise, passionate about his craft in the way that only true artists can be. He also happens to be someone whose restaurant I'd saved 3 years ago. Excuse me, he said, his accent making even the interruptions sound elegant. I don't mean to disturb your dinner, but... His eyes found mine, and his face broke into a genuine smile. Mrs. Bennet? C'est vraiment vous. The table went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people pausing their conversation for a brief interruption, but the sharp, sudden quiet of people realizing something unexpected was happening. Chef Dubois, I replied warmly. How wonderful to see you. The confusion on Patricia's face was almost comical. Her perfectly composed expression cracked just slightly as she tried to process why the head chef of one of the city's most prestigious restaurants was greeting the simple small-town language tutor with such obvious familiarity and respect. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chef Du Bois announced to the table, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard, "you are dining with a very special woman tonight." Greg straightened in his chair, suddenly alert. Chloe actually put down her phone. Patricia's smile became fixed, artificial, like a photograph that's been held too long. Ethan looked at me with confusion and curiosity. He'd never heard this story. There were many stories about the insurance company that I'd never shared with him, many ways David and I had helped people that didn't need to be family legends. This woman, Chef Du Bois continued, his hand gesturing toward me with something approaching reverence, saved my restaurant. Saved my dream. Saved everything I had worked 20 years to build. You could have heard a pin drop. The quiet wasn't comfortable anymore. It was the kind of silence that comes before thunder. 3 years ago, Chef Du Bois began, settling into the story with the comfortable rhythm of someone who'd told it many times. We had a fire. Not a big fire, but big enough. Kitchen equipment destroyed, dining room damaged, everything covered in smoke and water from the sprinklers. Patricia's wine glass seemed frozen halfway to her lips. The insurance company said it was an electrical issue, probably caused by our negligence. They wanted to pay maybe 30% of what we needed to rebuild. 30%. Can you imagine? He shook his head, the memory still causing him pain. I was going to lose everything. 20 years of work, gone. My staff would lose their jobs. My family would lose our home. All because some insurance adjuster decided that a restaurant fire must be the chef's fault. Greg was very still now, his earlier confidence evaporating like steam from a hot plate. But then, Chef Du Bois continued, his voice warming, Mrs. Bennett's company took over the claim. She came here herself, walked through the damage, talked to my staff, reviewed every piece of evidence. She didn't just pay the claim, she fought for us. She brought in independent investigators, fire safety experts, electrical engineers. She proved that the fire was caused by faulty building wiring, not anything we had done. She made sure we got enough money not just to repair, but to upgrade everything. Chloe was staring at me like I'd suddenly sprouted wings. More than that, the chef continued. She expedited everything. Most insurance claims take months, sometimes years. Mrs. Bennett had our money in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. She said that people's livelihoods were at stake, that justice delayed was justice denied. He paused, looking directly at me with eyes that held genuine emotion. She saved 43 jobs. She saved my marriage. The stress was killing us. She saved this place that had been my life's work. And when I tried to thank her, tried to offer her free meals for life, you know what she said? The table was completely silent now. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to have faded away. She said, just take care of your people and keep making beautiful food. That's thanks enough. I remember that day. I remember walking through the destroyed kitchen with Chef Du Bois, seeing the despair in his eyes, understanding that this wasn't just about money. It was about dreams, about purpose, about everything that makes life worth living. I remember thinking about David, about how he built the company to help people when they needed it most. I remember knowing that this was exactly the kind of situation where we could make a real difference, where doing the right thing mattered more than protecting profit margins. I had no idea that 3 years later, this moment of doing what felt natural and right would become my shield against people who mistook kindness for weakness. Chef Du Bois excused himself after sending over a bottle of vintage champagne, with the restaurant's compliments and eternal gratitude. The silence he left behind was deafening. Patricia was the first to recover, her social training kicking in like muscle memory. Well, she said, her voice artificially bright, isn't that lovely? You never mentioned that you were in insurance, Laura. Insurance. As if I'd been a clerk filing paperwork instead of the owner of the company. You didn't ask, I replied simply, taking a sip of the champagne. It was excellent, crisp, complex, probably worth more than some people spend on groceries in a month. Greg was recalibrating rapidly, his businessman's brain working overtime to reframe the situation. Insurance can be quite lucrative, he said carefully. especially if you have the right connections. Connections. He was still trying to position himself as the one with valuable relationships, even as the evidence of my own influence sat bubbling in expensive crystal in front of us. Chloe, meanwhile, was Googling something frantically on her phone. I could see her searching Bennett Associates Insurance and Laura Bennett Insurance Company. I could watch her face change as she found the articles about the sale, the industry recognition, the awards David's company had won under my leadership. But it was Ethan's reaction that broke my heart. My son was looking at me with something approaching shock, as if he'd never really seen me before. As if the mother he thought he knew had just revealed herself to be someone entirely different. "Mom," he said quietly, "why didn't you ever tell me about this? How do you explain to your child that you never told him about the good you'd done because you were raised to believe that true charity doesn't seek recognition? How do you explain that you'd wanted him to love people for who they were, not what they could do for him? How do you explain that you'd been protecting him from becoming exactly like the people sitting at this table?" The change in their behavior was swift and absolute, like watching actors switch roles mid-performance. Patricia, who minutes earlier had been explaining fine dining to me like I was a child, suddenly became fascinated by my business acumen and strategic thinking. She wanted to know about my investment portfolio and whether I might be interested in joint ventures. Greg, who had been offering to open doors for my son, now spoke about mutual opportunities and leveraging our combined networks. He mentioned several business deals that could benefit from someone with my expertise in risk management. Chloe was the worst of all. She put away her phone entirely, a miracle in itself, and began asking about my personal brand and whether I'd ever considered monetizing my story. She talked about book deals and speaking engagements and how my journey from tragedy to triumph could inspire millions. My tragedy, David's death, the loss of everything that had mattered to me, my struggle to rebuild a life that made sense without him, all of it was just content to her, just material for the mill of her shallow, performative world. "You're so inspiring," she gushed, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Like you've been through so much and you're still so humble. It's amazing. Humble. As if humility was a choice I'd made instead of a value I'd been raised with. As if it was something quaint and old-fashioned rather than the foundation of human decency. They wanted to be my friends now. They wanted to include me in their plans, their social circle, their carefully curated world of connections and opportunities. They spoke about family dinners and holiday gatherings and how wonderful it would be to really get to know each other. But here's what they didn't understand. Respect that comes after revelation isn't respect at all. It's calculation. It's strategic repositioning. It's the same cruelty they'd shown me earlier, just pointed in a different direction. They hadn't suddenly realized I was worthy of basic human decency. They'd realized I was useful. Through all of this, I watched my son's face change. Ethan had been raised to be a good judge of character, but he'd also been raised to see the best in people, to give them the benefit of the doubt, to assume good intentions until proven otherwise. Watching the people he thought he knew transform so completely and so quickly was clearly shaking something fundamental in his worldview. When Chloe suggested that I could be the matriarch of our family brand and help them build a lifestyle empire, I saw him flinch. When Patricia began talking about introducing me to her influential friends who could help me maximize my potential, I saw him look embarrassed. When Greg started outlining business opportunities that could benefit us all, I saw my son finally understand what these people really were. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about watching my child realize that the woman he loved, the people he thought could become his family, had just spent 2 hours systematically humiliating his mother. It was about seeing him understand that their sudden change in behavior was somehow even worse than their original cruelty. At least when they were being openly dismissive, they were being honest about who they were. "Mom," he said again, more urgently this time, "we need to talk." But I wasn't ready to leave yet. I wasn't finished learning about these people. Because now that their masks had fallen, now that they thought they understood the new power dynamic, I wanted to see just how far their greed and social climbing would take them. I wanted to see if there was any bottom to their shallowness. Over the next 30 minutes as we finished dinner and moved to dessert, I got my answer. Patricia began talking about charity work, not because she cared about helping people, but because she thought I might want to donate to worthy causes that would raise both our social profiles. She mentioned galas and fundraising committees and the right kind of philanthropy that gets noticed. Greg outlined several investment opportunities that he claimed were exclusive and only available to people with serious capital. He spoke about private equity and real estate deals and offshore opportunities that could optimize tax efficiency. Chloe was building an entire social media strategy around our family merger. She talked about how my comeback story could complement their luxury lifestyle brand. She suggested photo shoots at my quaint country home and collaborations with authenticity-focused sponsors. They were strip mining my life for content. They were turning my husband's death, my grief, my struggle to rebuild, my decision to live quietly and help others. They were turning all of it into material for their shallow, grasping, performance-obsessed world. And they thought I should be grateful for the opportunity. When Patricia suggested that I might want to upgrade my living situation to something more befitting your status, I realized they weren't just trying to use me. They were trying to remake me entirely. They wanted to transform me into their version of what a wealthy woman should be, stripping away everything authentic about my life and replacing it with their hollow markers of success. They wanted me to move to the city, to buy designer clothes, to join the right clubs, to attend the right parties, to be seen with the right people. They wanted me to become another performer in their endless theater of status and appearance. They wanted me to become them. That's when I'd had enough. "Excuse me," I said quietly, standing from the table. "I need to powder my nose." In the restaurant's bathroom, a marble temple to luxury that probably costs more to build than most people's houses, I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to process what I'd just experienced. These people had spent the first half of the evening systematically humiliating me because they thought I was beneath them. They'd insulted my appearance, my home, my career, my intelligence, my life choices. They'd treated me like a charity case, a burden to be managed, an embarrassment to be endured. And then, the moment they realized I had money, they'd immediately tried to absorb me into their toxic, shallow, materialistic world. They'd gone from wanting to exclude me to wanting to exploit me in the span of 10 minutes. Not once, had any of them apologized for their earlier behavior. Not once had they acknowledged that they'd misjudged me, that they'd been cruel, that they'd spent 2 hours treating me like I was less than human. They just pivoted. They just recalibrated. They just started treating me well because now it served their interests to do so. Standing in that bathroom, I realized something that made me feel sick to my stomach. This was what my son was going to marry into. This was the family that was going to become his family. These people, with their casual cruelty and their calculating kindness and their complete absence of genuine human decency. And Ethan, my good-hearted, trusting son, was going to spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of people who would never see him as anything more than a useful accessory to their perfect life. I returned to the table with my mind made up. "This has been educational," I said, placing my napkin on the table. "But I think it's time for me to go." Patricia immediately protested. "Oh, but we haven't finished planning. There's so much we need to discuss about the wedding, about bringing our families together." Our families. As if families were corporate entities entering into a merger. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I replied calmly. Greg stood up, extending his hand. "Laura, I hope you'll consider some of the opportunities we discussed. I think we could do great things together." I looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. This was the same hand that had dismissively waved away my simple life an hour earlier. The same hand that had gestured condescendingly while he explained business concepts to me like I was a child. I shook it briefly, professionally. "I'll consider everything you've shown me tonight, because that was the truth. I would consider everything they'd shown me. I would consider their casual cruelty and their calculating opportunism. I would consider their willingness to humiliate someone they thought was powerless and their eagerness to exploit someone they discovered was useful. I would consider all of it when I decided what kind of relationship I wanted with these people going forward." Chloe pouted prettily. "But we're going to be family. We need to get to know each other better." Maybe you could come stay with us for a weekend? We could do some shopping, maybe go to a spa. Shopping and spas. Because that's what she thought wealthy women did together. They bought things and had things done to them. They performed the rituals of affluence without any deeper connection or meaning. That sounds lovely. I lied smoothly. We'll definitely have to plan something. Ethan walked me to my car, and I could feel the weight of everything he needed to say pressing down on both of us. Mom, he started, then stopped. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me about the company? About what you accomplished? How do you explain to your adult child that you never wanted him to love you for what you'd achieved? That you'd wanted him to respect you for who you were, not what you could give him? That you'd spent his entire childhood trying to teach him that character mattered more than money, that kindness was more valuable than connections, that the measure of a person had nothing to do with their bank account? Because I wanted you to choose people based on how they treated you, not how they treated successful me, I said quietly. I wanted you to see who people really were when they thought there was nothing to gain from being kind. He was quiet for a long moment, processing this. They were horrible to you, he said finally. Yes, they were. And then they completely changed when they found out about the money. Yes, they did. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. I waited. Is this who Chloe really is? Is this who her family really is? Because if it is... He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. I chose my words carefully. Sweetheart, you've seen who they are when they think they're dealing with someone beneath them, and you've seen who they are when they think they're dealing with someone who can benefit them. What you haven't seen yet is who they are when they're dealing with someone they consider an equal. Maybe they just had a bad night, he said, but I could hear in his voice that he didn't believe it. Maybe, I agreed. But in my experience, how people treat those they think are powerless tells you everything you need to know about their character. The drive home gave me 2 hours to process what had happened, and with each mile, my anger grew instead of diminishing. I thought about Patricia's condescending smile when she'd criticized my outfit. I thought about Greg's patronizing tone when he'd offered to explain fine dining to me. I thought about Chloe's casual dismissal of my work, my life, my choices. But mostly, I thought about the calculating way they'd transformed the moment they'd realized I might be useful to them. This wasn't just about being rude to me. This was about a fundamental corruption of human decency. These people didn't see others as individuals worthy of respect. They saw them as resources to be evaluated and either exploited or discarded based on their potential utility. They had revealed themselves to be the kind of people who would step on anyone they thought was beneath them and immediately try to befriend anyone they thought was above them. They had no center, no core values, no genuine relationships, just an endless series of strategic calculations about who was worth their time and kindness. And my son was going to marry into this. My beautiful, principled, good-hearted son was going to become part of a family that would judge him every day by their twisted metrics of success and status. They would never love him for who he was. They would only value him for what he could do for them. They would change him. Slowly, subtly, but inevitably. They would teach him to see the world through their eyes, to judge people by their standards, to prioritize appearances over authenticity. They would turn him into them. By the time I reached my small, quiet house, my simple home that these people thought I should abandon for something more befitting my status, I was crying. Not just sad tears, but angry tears, frustrated tears, tears of grief for the innocence my son was about to lose. The next morning, my phone rang at 7 a.m. It was Ethan. Mom, I called off the engagement. Oh, sweetheart. I couldn't stop thinking about last night. About how they treated you, about how quickly they changed, about what that meant about who they really are. He paused, and I could hear him struggling with his emotions. But it wasn't just about you, Mom. It was about me too. I realized that if I married Chloe, if I became part of that family, I would turn into them eventually. I would start judging people the way they do. I would start treating people the way they treated you. My son had chosen character over comfort, principle over convenience. He had walked away from a beautiful woman and a wealthy family because he'd finally seen who they really were beneath their perfect facades. How did Chloe take it? I asked gently. She didn't understand at first. She kept saying that her parents loved me, that they thought I was perfect for their family. She couldn't comprehend that I was ending our relationship because of how her family had treated you. And when you explained it, she said I was being ridiculous. She said that her parents were just getting to know you and that their behavior was perfectly normal. She said that if I was going to be oversensitive about every little social interaction, I would never fit into their world anyway. Every little social interaction. 2 hours of systematic humiliation followed by calculating manipulation was just a little social interaction in her world. The complete absence of apology or acknowledgement was perfectly normal behavior. She also said, Ethan continued, his voice getting harder, that maybe it was better this way because she wasn't sure you would have been the right fit for their family anyway. The right fit. Even after everything, even after they discovered I had money and influence, they still saw me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. Over the next few weeks, as word of the broken engagement spread through their social circle, I received a series of increasingly desperate communications from Patricia, Greg, and Chloe. First came the flowers, expensive arrangements delivered to my house with cards expressing regret for any misunderstanding and hopes that we could start fresh. Not apologies, mind you. Regrets for misunderstandings, as if their behavior had been misinterpreted rather than genuinely cruel. Then came the phone calls. Patricia wanted to invite me to lunch to clear the air. Greg suggested we meet for coffee to discuss mutual interests. Chloe called to tell me that she and Ethan had worked things out and that she hoped I would reconsider my position. Except they hadn't worked things out. When I called Ethan to check, he confirmed that he hadn't spoken to Chloe since the breakup. She was lying, trying to manipulate me into pressuring my son to reconsider. The final communication was the most revealing. Patricia called me directly, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration. Laura, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. We never meant to offend you. We were just trying to get to know you better. I understand. I replied calmly. I think if we could just sit down together, we could work this out. Ethan and Chloe are perfect for each other. You can't let one awkward dinner ruin their happiness. One awkward dinner. 2 hours of calculated cruelty followed by shameless opportunism was just one awkward dinner. Patricia, I said quietly, you've shown me exactly who you are. All of you have. And now you're surprised that there are consequences for that revelation. But we like you, she protested. We think you're wonderful. We want you to be part of our family. You like me now because you think I'm useful to you. You wanted to humiliate me when you thought I was beneath you. Neither of those reactions has anything to do with who I actually am as a person. That's not, we never. She stammered. Patricia, you spent 2 hours explaining things to me like I was a child, criticizing my appearance, dismissing my work, and treating me like a burden to be endured. The moment you realized I had money, you immediately tried to exploit me. You haven't apologized once for your behavior. You've only tried to manage the consequences of it. There was a long silence. People like you, she said finally, her voice turning cold, never understand how things really work. People like me. There it was, the mask dropping one final time. You're absolutely right, I replied. I don't understand how things work in your world. I don't understand how you can be cruel to someone and then expect them to be grateful when you decide to be kind. I don't understand how you can judge people based on their utility to you rather than their character. I don't understand how you can live without any genuine human connections. Your son will never find anyone better than Chloe, she said, her voice turning vicious. He'll regret this for the rest of his life. Patricia, my son just learned that he's strong enough to walk away from people who would diminish him. He just discovered that he values integrity more than social status. He just proved that he'd rather be alone than compromise his principles. That may be the most valuable lesson anyone has ever taught him. Here's what Patricia and Greg and Chloe never understood. Having money doesn't change who you are. It just reveals who you were all along. When David and I built the insurance company, we didn't build it to get rich. We built it to help people when they needed it most. When I ran the company after his death, I didn't run it to accumulate wealth. I ran it to honor his vision and continue helping people. When I sold the company, I didn't sell it to buy status or connections or entry into exclusive social circles. I sold it because I was tired, because I was grieving, because I needed to find a different way to live without David. The money was never the point. The money was just a tool for helping people like Chef Du Bois, a tool for ensuring my independence, a tool for giving my son the freedom to make choices based on his values rather than financial necessity. But for people like Patricia's family, money isn't a tool. It's a weapon. It's a way to keep score, to establish hierarchies, to determine who deserves respect and who doesn't. They use their wealth to insulate themselves from the consequences of their behavior, to buy their way out of accountability, to surround themselves with people who tell them what they want to hear. They think money makes them better than other people, when in reality, how you treat people when you think they can't benefit you reveals who you really are. They think wealth entitles them to judge others, when in reality, true character shows itself in how you behave toward those you consider beneath you. They mistake having money for being worthy of respect, when respect is something you earn through your actions, your integrity, your treatment of others. 3 months later, Ethan called me with news that filled my heart with pride. Mom, I met someone. Her name was Sarah. She was a teacher at an inner-city school, working with kids who had been written off by almost everyone else. She lived in a small apartment, drove an old car, and spent her weekends volunteering at a homeless shelter. She doesn't know about the money, does she? I asked. She knows you're comfortable, but no, she doesn't know the details. And Mom? She's incredible. She's kind and funny and smart, and she cares about things that matter. She treats everyone the same way, the janitor at her school, the principal, the kids she teaches, the homeless people at the shelter. She sees people. She sees people. Not resources, not opportunities, not useful connections.
People.
When do I get to meet her?
Soon. But Mom?
I want to take her somewhere simple for dinner. Maybe that little Italian place in your town? I want to see who she is when there's no pressure, no performance, no judgment. My son had learned the lesson I'd been trying to teach him his entire life. You discover people's character not by how they treat those who can help them, but by how they treat those who can't. Sarah and Ethan were married in a small ceremony in my garden. 50 people, simple flowers, homemade food, and more genuine joy than I'd ever seen at any elaborate society wedding. Sarah's family welcomed me immediately, not because of what I'd accomplished or what I could offer them, but because I was Ethan's mother and he loved me. They were teachers and nurses and social workers, people who had built their lives around service to others, people who measured success by the difference they made rather than the wealth they accumulated. During the reception, Sarah's father pulled me aside. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For raising a son who knows the difference between what matters and what doesn't. For teaching him that character is more important than status. For showing him that real love doesn't keep score." I thought about Patricia and Greg and Chloe, probably at some charity gala or country club event, performing their sophisticated lives for an audience of people just like them. I thought about their empty relationships and their strategic friendships and their complete inability to connect with anyone authentically. And I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. Because here's what people like Patricia's family never understand. When you judge everyone by what they can do for you, you never experience genuine human connection. When you base all your relationships on strategic benefit, you never know if anyone actually likes you for who you are. They live in a world where every friendship is transactional, where every conversation is calculated, where every kindness comes with an expected return. They're surrounded by people, but completely alone. They have everything money can buy, but nothing that money can't replace. They've built their lives around accumulating things: wealth, status, connections, influence, but they've never learned how to accumulate what actually matters: love, respect, authentic relationships, the satisfaction of helping others without expecting anything in return. Chloe will probably marry someone else from their social circle, someone who appreciates her perfect appearance and her family's connections and her ability to perform the role of wealthy wife. But she'll never know if he loves her or just the idea of her, just what she represents in their carefully constructed world. Greg will continue making deals and building wealth and expanding his influence, but he'll never have a friend who calls him just to see how he's doing, never have a relationship that isn't based on mutual benefit. Patricia will continue hosting charity luncheons and attending social events and maintaining her position in their hierarchy, but she'll never experience the deep satisfaction that comes from helping someone who can never pay you back. They've traded their souls for status, and they don't even realize what they've lost. 2 years after that dinner, I received one last communication from their family. It was a wedding invitation. Chloe was marrying a pharmaceutical heir, someone whose family wealth made even her parents' fortune look modest. The invitation was elaborate, engraved, expensive. The kind of invitation that announces not just a wedding but a merger of two powerful families. The kind of invitation designed to impress people with its cost rather than its meaning. I wondered if Chloe was happy. I wondered if her new fiancé saw her as a person or as an accessory to his life. I wondered if they would treat his family the way they treated me, if they would find themselves dismissed and diminished by people who considered them inadequate. I wondered if they would ever learn that the way you treat others is the way you teach others to treat you. But mostly, I thought about the difference between their wedding and my son's wedding, between performance and authenticity, between strategic alliance and genuine love, between impressing others and celebrating with people who actually care about you. You know, when I started telling this story, I thought it was about revenge. I thought it was about people getting their comeuppance, about the satisfying moment when cruel people realize they've misjudged someone. But the more I've reflected on it, the more I realize it's really about pain. It's about the pain of being diminished by people who think they're better than you. It's about the pain of watching your child almost marry into a family that would destroy everything good about him. It's about the pain of realizing that some people are so corrupted by privilege and status that they've lost their basic humanity. It's about the pain of understanding that there are people in this world who will never see you as fully human if you can't benefit them somehow. But it's also about the pain of pity, the pain of seeing people who have everything and nothing at the same time, people who have built their entire lives around hollow achievements and empty relationships. The anger is still there. I'm still angry at how they treated me, still angry at how they were willing to sacrifice my son's happiness for their own social advancement, still angry at their complete lack of remorse or self-reflection. But underneath the anger is a deeper sadness. Sadness for people who will never experience genuine human connection. Sadness for lives built on foundations that can crumble the moment your usefulness expires. The real victory wasn't the moment Chef Du Bois recognized me. It wasn't watching their masks fall, or seeing them scramble to reposition themselves. It wasn't even the satisfaction of knowing that their greed and social climbing had cost them my son. The real victory was watching my son choose character over convenience. The real victory was seeing him recognize that people who would humiliate his mother were not people he wanted to build a life with. The real victory was knowing that the values David and I had tried to instill in him were strong enough to guide him when it mattered most. The real victory was Sarah, genuine, kind, authentic Sarah, who sees people for who they are rather than what they can provide. The real victory was their simple, joyful wedding filled with people who love them rather than people who might be useful to them. The real victory was knowing that my son had learned the most important lesson of all, that how you treat people when you think they can't help you reveals everything about who you really are. Before I wrap this up, I want to talk directly to everyone who's been watching this story unfold. If you've made it this far, and thank you for staying with me through all of this, I want you to know that this isn't really about money or revenge, or even rude people getting their comeuppance. This is about something much more fundamental, the choice we all make every day about how to treat other people. You have probably encountered people like Patricia and Greg and Chloe in your own life. Maybe not as extremely wealthy or obviously cruel, but people who judge you based on what you can do for them rather than who you are. People who are kind to those above them and dismissive of those below them. People who mistake having more for being better. And you've probably been in situations where you had to choose between going along with that behavior and standing up for what's right, even when it was uncomfortable or costly. I want you to know that how you make those choices matters. It matters more than your bank account, more than your job title, more than your social media following, more than any external measure of success. The way you treat people, all people, regardless of what they can do for you, is the measure of who you are. It's how you build a life that means something. It's how you create relationships that sustain you. It's how you become the kind of person you can respect when you look in the mirror. 3 years have passed since that dinner, and I still think about it regularly. Not because I'm dwelling on the hurt or reliving the anger, but because it crystallized something important about human nature and social dynamics that I'd understood intellectually but never experienced so viscerally. I think about all the times in my life when I encountered people being cruel to service workers, dismissive of people they considered beneath them, condescending to anyone they thought was less educated or sophisticated or successful. I think about how often I stayed silent, how often I told myself it wasn't my business, how often I chose comfort over confrontation. I think about how many small cruelties I witnessed and did nothing about, how many opportunities one missed to stand up for people who were being diminished or dismissed. And I think about how different the world might be if more of us chose to speak up, chose to refuse to participate in systems that dehumanize others, chose to treat service with dignity and difference with respect. I think about my son and Sarah and how they're building their lives around service and connection and genuine care for others. I think about the children Sarah teaches, many of whom have been written off by society, and how her belief in their worth might change the trajectory of their entire lives. I think about the ripple effects of choosing kindness over convenience, character over status, authenticity over performance. But here's what I've really learned from all of this. The dinner at La Bernardine wasn't an aberration. It wasn't an unusually bad example of human behavior. It was just a particularly concentrated dose of something that happens everywhere, every day, people using their perceived advantages to diminish others, people mistaking external circumstances for internal worth, people forgetting that everyone deserves basic human dignity regardless of their position in whatever hierarchy we've constructed. We live in a world that constantly tells us that some people matter more than others, that wealthy people are more important than poor people, that famous people are more valuable than unknown people, that people with advanced degrees are smarter than people without them, that people with prestigious jobs are more worthy of respect than people with ordinary jobs. And most of us, most of the time, go along with these hierarchies. We participate in them, we reinforce them, we use them to our advantage when we can, and accept them as natural when we can't. But they're not natural. They're constructed. They're choices we make about how to organize society, how to distribute respect, how to determine whose voices matter and whose experiences count. So here's what I want to leave you with. You have the power to choose differently. Every day, in small ways and large ways, you have the opportunity to treat people as if their humanity matters more than their usefulness to you. You can choose to be genuinely kind to the person taking your order, cleaning your office, delivering your packages. You can choose to listen respectfully to people whose perspectives differ from yours. You can choose to stand up when you see someone being diminished or dismissed. You can choose to measure people by their character rather than their circumstances, by their kindness rather than their credentials, by their integrity rather than their income. These aren't grand gestures. They're small, daily choices that seem insignificant in the moment, but that collectively determine what kind of world we live in and what kind of person you become. And if you're someone who has been on the receiving end of the kind of treatment I experienced that night, if you've been judged, dismissed, underestimated, or humiliated by people who thought they were better than you, I want you to know that their behavior says nothing about your worth and everything about their character. Your value as a human being is not determined by other people's recognition of it. Your dignity cannot be taken away by people who refuse to acknowledge it. Your worth is inherent, unchangeable, sacred, regardless of what anyone else thinks about your clothes or your job or your address or your bank account. People often ask me if I think Patricia and her family got what they deserved, if I think justice was served, if I'm satisfied with how everything turned out. The truth is, I don't think about it in terms of justice or revenge or punishment. I think about it in terms of natural consequences. They revealed their character, and my son made a decision based on that revelation. They showed him who they were when they thought there was nothing to lose, and he decided those weren't the kind of people he wanted to build a life with. That's not punishment. That's just the natural result of their choices. When you treat people badly, you lose the opportunity to have them in your life. When you judge people harshly, You lose access to their wisdom and friendship and love. When you prioritize status over character, you end up surrounded by people who care more about what you have than who you are. The real tragedy isn't that they lost my son as a son-in-law. The real tragedy is that they're living lives so disconnected from authentic human experience that they can't even see what they've lost. They're still out there, still attending their charity galas and country club events, still networking and deal-making and performing their sophisticated lives. But they're doing it all in service of something hollow, something that can never actually satisfy them because it's built on the systematic devaluation of other human beings. But you know what gives me hope? What keeps me from despairing about people like Patricia's family? It's stories like my son and Sarah. Last month, Sarah called me to share some news. One of her students, a kid who'd been labeled as learning disabled and troublemaker by previous teachers, had just been accepted to college with a full scholarship. "Mrs. Bennett," Sarah said, and I could hear her crying happy tears. He wrote in his application essay about how having a teacher who believed in him changed everything. About how learning that someone saw his potential instead of his problems made him want to become the person she thought he could be. That's the real power in this world. Not the power to diminish people, but the power to see their potential and help them realize it. Not the power to judge and exclude, but the power to include and elevate. Not the power to use people, but the power to love them. Every day, Sarah goes to work and treats children who have been discarded by society as if they matter, as if they have something valuable to contribute, as if their dreams are worth pursuing. And every day, some of those children internalize that message and decide to believe in themselves. That's how the world changes. Not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through millions of small acts of recognition and respect and love. I think about Sarah and Ethan's wedding day, about the moment during their vows when Sarah said something that brought tears to my eyes. She looked at my son and said, "Ethan, thank you for showing me that there are people in this world who choose kindness even when it costs them something. Thank you for walking away from convenience when it conflicted with your values. Thank you for teaching me that real love means seeing and choosing each other's character, not just our circumstances." And then she turned to look at me, sitting in the front row, and said, "And thank you, Mrs. Bennett, for raising a man who knows the difference between what's impressive and what's important." In that moment, I understood that everything we'd been through, David's death, my struggle to rebuild, the painful dinner, the broken engagement, all of it, had led to this moment of pure, authentic love between two people who had chosen each other for all the right reasons. That's when I finally let go of the anger. That's when I finally felt peace about what had happened with Patricia's family. Because I realized that their cruelty had actually been a gift. It had forced my son to choose clearly between two very different ways of being in the world, and he had chosen love. So here we are, at the end of this long story, and I want to thank you for staying with me through all of it. I know it's been heavy at times, painful at times, angry at times, but I hope it's also been illuminating. If you're still here, if you've listened to this entire story, please do me a favor. In the comments, tell me about a time when someone surprised you with their kindness. Tell me about a moment when someone saw your value when others didn't. Tell me about a person in your life who chooses character over convenience, love over status, authenticity over performance. Because for every story like mine, every story about cruelty and judgment and the pain of being diminished, there are thousands of stories about unexpected kindness, about people who lift each other up, about love triumphing over fear. And if you take nothing else from this story, take this: you have the power to be one of those people. You have the power to see others' humanity when they're struggling to see it themselves. You have the power to choose kindness when cruelty would be easier. You have the power to build a life based on love rather than fear. The choice is yours every single day. Choose wisely. As I finished telling this story, I realized that the real lesson isn't about money or status or getting revenge on people who underestimate you. The real lesson is about the incredible power we all have to either build people up or tear them down, to see their humanity or reduce them to their usefulness, to choose love or choose fear. Patricia and Greg and Chloe chose fear. They chose to protect themselves by diminishing others. They chose to build their sense of worth by tearing down people they perceived as threats to their status. They chose performance over authenticity, status over character, judgment over compassion. And in making those choices, they lost something precious, the opportunity to connect with other human beings in genuine, meaningful ways. They lost the chance to experience the deep satisfaction that comes from lifting others up. They lost access to the wisdom and love and friendship of people they deemed unworthy. But my son chose love. He chose to see their behavior clearly and reject it. He chose to value character over convenience. He chose to walk away from material advantages in order to preserve his integrity. And in making that choice, he gained something priceless. A partner who sees him clearly and loves him authentically, a life built on genuine values rather than artificial status, the satisfaction of knowing that his relationships are based on who he is rather than what he can provide. The story doesn't end with the wedding, though. It continues every day as Sarah and Ethan build their life together, as they raise their children. Yes, I'm now a grandmother to the most beautiful little girl in the world, as they model for the next generation what it looks like to choose love over fear. My granddaughter is 3 years old now, and she's already showing signs of her parents' character. Last week, when we were at the grocery store together, she insisted on saying thank you to every employee we encountered, the person who helped us find items, the person who bagged our groceries, the person who collected carts in the parking lot. "Why do you always say thank you, sweetheart?" I asked her. "Because Mommy says everyone's job is important," she replied matter-of-factly. "And Daddy says being kind makes people happy." That's how the world changes. One child at a time, learning that everyone matters. One generation at a time, choosing to see humanity in everyone they meet. One family at a time, building their lives around love rather than fear. So that's my story. That's what happened when I walked into a fancy restaurant thinking I was meeting my son's future in-laws and discovered instead what kind of people they really were when they thought no one important was watching. I'm not telling you this story because I think I'm a hero. I'm not telling you this story because I want praise for how I handled a difficult situation. I'm telling you this story because I think we all need reminders that character matters more than status, that kindness is more valuable than wealth, that how we treat each other when we think no one important is watching reveals everything about who we really are. I'm telling you this story because I want you to know that you have the power to choose, every single day, what kind of person you want to be in the world. Choose kindness. Choose character. Choose love. The world needs more people who make that choice, and I believe you can be one of them. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being the kind of person who would spend this much time hearing about the importance of treating each other with dignity and respect. Now go out there and show the world what that looks like.